The wind didn't just blow across the Kansas plains that December, it screamed. It tore through Laya Hart's thin wool coat, seeking out the warmth of her skin like a predator. Beside her, little
Look
June,
at the sun!
only 6 years old, stumbled in the snow, her small hand gripping Laya's
Steady
fingers
now,
so
almost
hard,
there.
her
It's
knuckles
heavy,
were
but
white.
I can do it.
Behind
Good.
them,
Now push.
the chimney of the Hart
Steady now,
Ranch
lift it high.
pumped gray
It's so
smoke
heavy.
into the sky.
Almost there, push!
We
A
did
cruel
it!
sign
Yes, we
of the
did.
warmth they were leaving behind. That house had been Laya's home for 5 years. She had scrubbed its floors, birthed calves in its barns, and nursed her mother-in-law through a fever that nearly killed her. But none of that mattered now. 3 months ago, a horse had thrown Samuel, her husband. The fall had broken his neck and, effectively, Laya's life. With Samuel gone, his parents saw no use for a widow and a child. They wanted the land for Samuel's younger brother and his new wife. The message had been brutal and short. We can't feed extra mouths. Laya had been given an hour to pack. She had $23 sewn into the lining of her coat, a hunting knife, a pot, some dried beef, and Samuel's old rifle with barely any ammunition. "Mama, my feet hurt," June whimpered, her voice muffled by the scarf wrapped 3 times around her face. "I know, baby, I know," Laya said, picking the child up. June was getting too heavy to carry for long, but the snow was already drifting over her ankles. Laya didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she might scream, or worse, she might beg. And she would rather freeze on this prairie than beg the people who had discarded her daughter like trash. Welcome to Kindness Valley. Before we continue this story of incredible survival and a mother's unbreakable will, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us share more powerful stories like this one. Now, back to Laya and June. They walked for 2 days. The landscape was a frozen hellscape of gray and white. The first night, they slept under a canvas tarp stretched between 2 dead trees, huddled together for body warmth, while coyotes howled in the distance. By the second afternoon, the situation wasn't just desperate, it was deadly. Laya's boots were leaking. June was becoming lethargic, a sign that the cold was winning. Laya needed to find shelter, real shelter, or they wouldn't wake up tomorrow. She remembered Samuel once pointing out the limestone bluffs to the north. He'd mentioned caves, old pockets in the rock used by trappers years ago. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all they had. As the sun began to dip, casting long blue shadows across the snow, the bluffs rose up like jagged teeth. Laya scanned the rock face, her eyes stinging from the wind. She saw dark smudges against the gray stone. Caves. The first one was barely a dent in the rock, offering no protection. The second was deep, but smelled so strongly of bear scat that Laya backed away instantly. She almost gave up before she saw the third opening. It was partially hidden by a massive pile of boulders, likely a rock fall from decades past. It looked defensible, safe. Laya pushed past the boulders, dragging their small bundle of supplies. The moment they crossed the threshold, the screaming wind died away. It was silent inside. Cold, yes, but still. The air felt heavy and damp. Laya lit their oil lantern, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the match. The flame flared to life, pushing back the shadows. The cave was massive. It wasn't just a hole. It was a cathedral of stone, the ceiling vanishing into darkness 30 feet above. But then, Laya heard it. A soft, rhythmic lapping sound. Water. "Stay here," she whispered to June, who was sitting on the dry floor, eyes half closed. Laya moved deeper, holding the lantern high. The floor sloped downward, and there, in a natural depression in the limestone, was a pond. It was oval-shaped, perhaps 40 feet across. The water was crystal clear, illuminated by a shaft of fading daylight filtering down from a natural chimney hole high in the cavern roof. Laya stepped closer to the water's edge, praying it wasn't frozen solid. It wasn't. Steam was rising faintly from the surface. It was spring-fed, coming from deep within the earth where the frost couldn't reach. But what made Laya gasp wasn't the water. It was the movement. Dark shadows darted through the lantern light. Silver flashed in the depths. Fish. June, Laya breathed out, tears finally spilling over her frozen cheeks. June, look. There were dozens of them. They were trapped here, or perhaps they lived here, fed by the underground spring. It didn't matter. It was food. It was life. That first night, they didn't catch fish. They simply survived. Laya built a fire near the entrance, using the smoke hole high above to vent the fumes. They ate the last of their hard biscuits and slept. For the first time in days, the wind couldn't touch them. The next morning, the real work began. Laya knew that a fire and a cave weren't enough. The Kansas winter could drop to 20 below zero. The cave was naturally insulated, staying a steady, cool temperature, but cool would still kill them over 3 months. They needed a home within a home. Laya looked at a dry alcove set back from the main chamber. It was raised slightly, safe from the dampness of the pond. "We're going to build a house, June," Laya said, tying her hair back, "right here inside the rock." June looked at her with wide eyes. "A house inside?" "A cabin," Laya corrected. "Our cabin." For the next 3 weeks, Laya worked harder than she ever had on the ranch. She became a scavenger. She ventured out into the biting wind to drag back fallen timber, cottonwood and ash branches that had broken off in storms. She had no saw, only her knife and a small hatchet she'd found in the bottom of her pack. She couldn't cut down trees, so she had to find wood that nature had already harvested. The labor was grueling. Laya's hands blistered, then calloused, then cracked. She wrapped them in strips of cloth and kept working. She dragged logs into the cave, one by one. She taught June how to mix chinking, a mortar made from cave clay, water, and dried grass, to seal the gaps between the logs. The cabin wasn't pretty. It was a rough 8 by 10-foot box made of mismatched timber, wedged into the back of the cave. But when Laya hung the heavy canvas tarp over the roof beams and piled pine boughs on top for insulation, it became a sanctuary. She built a small stone hearth inside the cabin, venting the smoke out through a cleverly arranged pipe made of hollow logs she'd found. When the first blizzard of January hit, burying the world outside in 5 feet of snow, Laya and June were sitting inside their little wooden box, deep within the earth, warm and dry. But warmth was only half the battle. Hunger was the other enemy. Laya turned her attention to the pond. She fashioned a fishing line from the unraveled hem of her petticoat. For a hook, she spent 3 evenings whittling a piece of rabbit bone until it was sharp and curved. The first time she dropped the line in, baited with a tiny piece of salt pork, the water exploded. These fish had never seen a hook. They were hungry and aggressive. She pulled out a trout-like fish, nearly 2 pounds, its scales shimmering in the lantern light. June clapped her hands, her laughter echoing off the cave walls. "Dinner!" They ate fish roasted on flat stones. They ate fish boiled in the pot to make a rich broth. Laya learned to smoke the fish over the fire to preserve it. She taught June how to fish, and soon the 6-year-old was the primary provider. sitting patiently by the water's edge for hours, jerking the line with expert timing. "I caught the big one, Mama!" June would shout, holding up a wriggling prize. Laya watched her daughter change. The scared, shivering child who had left the ranch was gone. In her place was a cave dweller, a survivor. June wore a vest Laya had sewn from rabbit skins. Rabbits caught in snares Laya set near the cave entrance. She wore a necklace of fish vertebrae. She knew how to gut a fish and how to bank a fire so it lasted all night. They created a world in the darkness. Laya made a table from a flat slab of slate, balanced on rocks. She made beds raised off the floor, filled with dried grass and covered with their blankets. By the light of the fire, she taught June her letters, scratching the alphabet into the dirt floor. They told stories. They sang songs that bounced off the high ceiling, making them sound like a choir. But the cave was not without its dangers. In late February, the weather warmed slightly, causing the snow outside to melt and refreeze. The shifting temperatures made the rock unstable. One afternoon, Laya was near the cave entrance, scraping a rabbit hide. June was by the pond, humming to herself. Suddenly, a low groan vibrated through the floor. It sounded like the earth itself was in pain. "June, get in the cabin!" Laya screamed, dropping the hide. Before June could move, a thunderous crack split the air. Laya dove toward her daughter, tackling her and rolling them both behind a large stalagmite just as a section of the ceiling near the entrance gave way. The sound was deafening. Dust billowed out like a physical blow, choking them, blinding them. Rocks the size of anvils slammed into the cave floor where Laya had been standing seconds before. Silence followed, heavy and terrifying. "Mama," June coughed, her face buried in Laya's coat. "I've got you." "Don't move," Laya whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They waited for the dust to settle. When Laya finally stood up, raising the lantern, she saw the damage. The entrance was partially blocked. A massive pile of rubble now sat between them and the outside world. Panic flared in her chest. Were they trapped? Laya climbed over the debris, coughing in the dusty air. She reached the top of the rock pile and felt a draft. Fresh air. There was still a gap, about 3 feet wide, at the very top of the entrance. They weren't trapped. In fact, as the days passed, Laya realized the rockfall was a blessing in disguise. The pile of stones acted as a perfect windbreak. The freezing drafts that used to snake along the floor were gone. The cave became warmer, the temperature stabilizing even further. What could have killed them had only made their fortress stronger. March arrived, bringing with it the sound of dripping water. The icicles hanging like daggers from the cliff face began to shrink. The patch of sky visible through the smoke hole turned a brilliant, hopeful blue. One morning, Laya climbed out of the cave. The snow was retreating, revealing patches of brown earth and wet grass. The air smelled of mud and new life. She stood on the bluff, looking out over the valley. In the distance, she saw the smoke of the Hart Ranch. She felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't fear. It was pity. The Harts were down there, miserable and bitter, guarding their land and their pride. Meanwhile, she and June had conquered the winter. They had built a home from nothing. They had eaten like queens on fresh fish, while the ranchers likely survived on salted pork and dry beans. Laya climbed back down into the cave. June was at the table, using a fishbone needle to sew a tear in her sleeve. The cabin was warm, smelling of wood smoke and sage. "Is it spring?" June asked, not looking up. "It is," Laya said, sitting down across from her. "Do we have to leave?" June asked. The question hung in the air. Laya looked around at the limestone walls, at the shimmering pond that had saved their lives, at the sturdy little cabin that had kept them safe. She thought about the $23 still untouched in her coat. She thought about the town, miles away, where she would eventually have to go to find work and schooling for June. "Not yet," Laya smiled, reaching out to squeeze her daughter's hand. "The fish are biting, the house is warm, and no one knows we're here. We'll stay a little longer." They stayed until the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie. When they finally packed their bundles and walked out of the cave for the last time, they didn't look like refugees. They walked with their heads high, strong, and healthy. Laya carried the rifle, and June carried her fishing pole. They walked past the Hart Ranch without stopping, without even glancing at the windows. They didn't need anything from those people. They had found their own strength in the dark. They had turned a hole in the ground into a palace, and they had survived. Thank you for watching this story on Kindness Valley. It's a reminder that even when the world shuts a door on you, you can build your own shelter. If Laya's story inspired you, please remember to hit that like button, leave a comment below about what you would have done in her shoes, and share this video with your family. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of resilience and hope. See you in the next video.